Good evening, everyone. How are you today? Hope everybody had a good Memorial Day weekend. Lots of stuff going on. Internationally, nationally, and brings us to week 86 of Sword in the Spirit, the Sermonator. All right, last week we got into the book of Micah, and we took it up to about verse 9 or 10 of chapter 5. But before I talk about that, I want to go back just a little bit to verse 5. All right, and it said, "And this man shall be the peace when the Assyrian shall come into your land. And when he shall tread in our palaces, then shall we rise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men." Okay, now we recognize all of that. But this Assyrian Empire, this was said about, 20 years after the Assyrian conquest of Israel. And I'll tell you, it was about 732 BC that Assyria mustered, that means gathered all their forces, not the stuff you put on hot dogs, to attack the northern kingdom, Israel. All right? Remember now that Judah and Benjamin were the southern kingdom, which comprised Judah and Jerusalem. Well, I got to tell you, they were pretty successful. It says in verse 6, "They shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword afterward." Okay, these are the 7 and the 8 principal men. And the land of Nimrod. Now, Nimrod is very, very important. Nimrod was an ancient king warrior. And he was responsible for Asherah, or what became Ishtar. And when we read through scripture about the groves and the high places, those were idol places, little temples to Ishtar, Isha, all right? That's where they got Easter from. The sunrise ceremony, Ishtar, it's the same thing. It was the Babylonian mystery religions. And Nimrod was a bad guy, a hunter and a king, etc. And there are stories about him being dead and coming back to life, etc. And it says that they're going to deliver us from the Assyrian when he comes into our land and when he treads within our borders. And listen, it says the remnant, and we're going to get back to that. The remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people. There's a subtle shift here, all right, between past, present, and future in Micah, as we often see with the prophets. So he's speaking of Assyria. This kingdom attacked to Israel in 732 BC. And about 20 years later, 700, 720, 710, it came to a point where the Assyrians beat everybody. But they got to the doorstep of Jerusalem, okay? And what they got when they got to Jerusalem was slaughtered. Yes. In the historical record, all right, Herodotus, the historian, and even Josephus, who was a military Israeli general and became a historian. Both of their books are available at any place. They're chronicles of what happened. And in the account given by both of them, the Assyrians were at the doorstep of Jerusalem and got wiped out. 185,000 men. Now, I know that when we talk about tens of thousands, it's an exaggeration. But when they give a specific number, like 185,000 souls, that's pretty accurate. That's what came against Jerusalem. Gone. Just like that. How? You want to know how? God sent a plague Does that sound familiar? There always seems to be a plague. He says the angel of the Lord, a messenger. An angel of the Lord is a messenger. Remember that, okay? A messenger. Angel means messenger of the Lord. And it was a plague, all right? But what kind of plague? Well, I'm going to tell you. Funny part about it is that it was a plague that they got from mice, who in turn got it from the lowly tick. So here we have the most powerful nation on earth at the time, Assyria, conquering everybody. It conquered all of the land that is now in what they used to call Asia Minor, which is now Turkey and below, in the Middle East. He pretty much had control of all of that, all right? The Assyrians did. And like I said, by the time 701 came around, there wasn't much going on. But actually, there's even a name for the disease. It's called murine. It comes, as I said, from a tick on a mouse. And as many plagues are spread by mouse and rats, these mice, all right, were responsible for this plague that wiped out 185,000 of these guys. I just want to go back because it's really important to see how God always does this, okay? He takes the mighty down with the low and the humble. The mighty kingdom of Assyria, 185,000 warring troops ready to siege Jerusalem, wiped out by a mouse. Worse yet, by a mouse carrying a tick that carried the disease. We see this time and time again, how the humble, the lowly, will take down the high and mighty, the arrogant. I want to take a look at 2 Kings just briefly. You know, kind of just fill in the information that we have as we go. 2 Kings chapter 19. 18, no, chapter 9, I'm sorry, chapter 18, chapter 19, here we are, 19 verses 35 through 37. It says, "And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed. He went and he returned and he dwelt in Nineveh." All right, we know about Nineveh. Remember, that's where God dumped Jonah, in the middle of Nineveh, in the belly of the beast, of the fish, the Dagon, the fish god, one of their prime examples of worship, in the middle of that city for 3 days and 3 nights to preach and to prophesy. So Nineveh was not a great place. That's where Nimrod ruled in those days. And in 37 it says, "And it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adramelech and Sherezar, his sons, smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his stead." Armenia, mentioned even way back then. Armenia became the first actual Christian nation, okay? Turkey has been genociding them, tried to do it over 100 years ago, then tried to do it earlier in the past couple of years again. Now, why does Turkey do that? And Turkey was in the news again today, very important, because as we take a look going back into Micah, we're going to start to see what I said before about how we move from the present to the past to the future in many of the references that he speaks of. But the interesting thing in the news was this: about I don't know, a week or so ago, two maybe a little longer, I was having a discussion with a friend of mine. And they are from that region, and they knew what my stand was as far as Turkey and their leadership. All right, Recep Erdogan, okay? And they said they doubted that Erdogan would get elected again. So my thoughts on what would happen here at the configuration of nations toward these end times here that we're in wouldn't happen because Erdogan didn't have much chance of winning. Well, he won big time yesterday. He is now once again the supreme ruler, king, president, whatever you want to call him, caliph of Turkey. I haven't gotten to speak to that person yet, but I might have to remind him of what happened. We can think that we're so assured of what's going to happen in the physical realm and what's going on in these days and all, but unless we have a guidepost and we stick to it, because I told this person, I said, it's never going to happen. Erdogan will be the president. I guarantee it. And, you know, he is. If you don't tie these things directly as they are understandable, all right? I'm not saying go out and make up wild assertions, this and that, but you have to look at the landscape. All right, that's my training, both biblically and international relations-wise, where I have, you know, degrees and all that stuff, and in my business. It all comes together, and you begin to see the picture that's painted, and you look retrospectively, like the prophets did, and we go back and we try it, we test it against the word itself, and then we form the assertions. Not until then, okay? Because I don't know how other people do it, but I constantly question what I learned and what I think I know. And when I give it out, then I'll come back and say, look, I had to go back and we took another look at this and another look at this, and more comes out, and more of the piece of puzzle begins to formulate, and it becomes a picture that is more clear to the observer. Okay, so just those couple little facts about how this went down. And you know what? Even back in 2 Kings, I might have to just flip a little bit tonight just to get the essential in. And I don't want to skip anything. I don't want you to miss a thing. I may go right back to chapter 19 of 2 Kings. Just very quickly. There was another verse that I wanted to read to you, and let's get that out on the table. And that is verse 32. We read 35 to 37. Let's go back to 32 for a quick minute. It says, therefore, thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with a shield, nor cast a bank against it. Now, why is this important? Because it was written in 2 Kings. And when was 2 Kings written? Okay, let's take a look. 2 Kings was written now about 555, 60 BC. And it was chronicled in both Kings and Chronicles about what happened. So we have a historical landmark here, just like having Josephus and the other fellow, you know, the same thing. The Israelites chronicled these things in their history. When you see 2 Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, those are historical data points, all right? Chronicled means to basically catalog, to chronicle, to take the information, the historic information, and to make sure it's written down. So what happened in 732 BC was spoken about here, all right, in 2 Kings. But the words are so precise. He shall come to the city, but he won't shoot an arrow there, nor will he come before it with a shield or a cast or a bank. And that's verse 32. So what we see again is the harmony of Scripture and how it works. And the same thing is true in 2 Chronicles, chapter 32, verse 21. It's the same story, repeated, okay? The same story. So, what do we got? We got this Assyrian Empire, all right, making its attack, getting wiped out, having the king murdered, okay? Sennacherib was no slouch. His own sons took him out. And we stand here and we get back right into Micah chapter 5. Then he says in verse 7, the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people. The remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people. That is the diaspora dispersion that came upon the Jewish people that was prophesied in Daniel. 70 weeks are determined upon your people, all right? And then they will be in great tribulation. And it was during the same time that that happened, and they were dispersed. The Jewish people were dispersed amongst all the world and squeezed and pressed. As I said, the word tribulation means to be pressed and squeezed and pushed out and squeezed into ghettos, is which would they happen in the Lodz ghetto in Poland. You can read about that anytime. There's so many books written about what happened. But that great tribulation upon those people, all right, would still result in a remnant, Now, why does he say a remnant of Jacob? Well, because Jacob's name was changed to Israel. All right. Now, we say Israel incorporates the entire Jewish people because the nation of Israel exists. But remember, Israel was the northern kingdom, the other 10 tribes, and they were scattered everywhere. Conquered, scattered, all over the place. And Judah and Benjamin as well. But when he says I'm going to have a remnant, okay, a remnant is a very, very specific term. A remnant means, literally, in Hebrew Aramaic, a residue, something that's left, survivors, refugees, remainder. Essentially, it means what is left of a community of people after it undergoes disaster and catastrophe. So the admission here, just in the word use alone, and we've read the word remnant, more than a few times in our studies. It says you will have a remnant. And here he looks way into the future and says, a remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people as a dew from the Lord, and he showers upon the grass that tarrieth not for man, nor waiteth for the sons of men. And the remnant, once again, of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles, in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest, as a young lion among the flocks of sheep, who if he go through both, treadeth down, and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver. So we see a vision of how God would disperse Jacob, Israel, amongst all the nations. All right? Then it says, thine hand shall be lifted up upon thine adversaries, and all thine enemies shall be cut off. It shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord, that I will cut off thy horses out of the midst of thee, and I will destroy thy chariots. I will cut off the cities of thy lands and throw down all the strongholds. I will cut off witchcrafts out of thine hand, and thou shalt have no more soothsayers. So what God is saying here through Micah is that when all this happens and when you're scattered, I'm going to destroy everything that you did wrong. Your witchcrafts are number one. That's idolatry, all right? I'm going to take you down a few pegs, your chariots, your horses, all of that. And then he goes in 13, it says, thy graven images, all right? Thy graven images also will I cut off, and thy standing images out of the midst of thee, and thou shalt no more worship the work of your own hands. And I'll pluck up thy groves. Remember, a grove was to Asherah or Ishtar, all right? A Babylonian goddess from Nimrod and the Assyrians. I will pluck up thy groves out of the midst of thee, and so will I destroy thy cities. And I'll execute vengeance in anger and fury upon the heathen, such as they've not heard. So everybody's getting a whooping. Israel for their transgressions, for their idolatry, for their hidden groves, even the way we had to, when we talk about Joash, as good as he was, all right? The guys in the temple were doing other stuff, and they were still backdoor worshiping in the dark, in the shadows, up in the groves. So God sees it all. So he says, I'm going to tear you down and all that stuff, and I'm going to execute vengeance on the heathen, such as they have not heard before. So he sets the stage very clearly. Very clearly. All right? And I'll tell you, it's a rough way to go. It's a rough way to go because this lasted like almost 2,000 years. Now, I want to go back to, I guess it was, I had promised we'd go back to chapter 2, and I want to make sure, I think it's chapter 2, I want to make sure, no, it's chapter 1. I want to make sure now that we speak about the judgment on Judah, okay? Now, in Micah chapter 1, just to readdress, in the very first couple of verses here, in verses 9 through 15, all right, there are a bunch of names mentioned. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, something like that. 11 names, maybe 12. Gath, Ephrath, Saphir, Zaanan, Beth Ezel, Maroth, Lachish, Achzib, Adullam, Marishah. These names are important. They're important. We know that we always check it out. What do they mean? Do they bring a message? And this section of Micah chapter 1 is a statement of the pending judgment on Judah. Okay? In Judah. Remember, everything was destroyed except Jerusalem. So Judah and Benjamin were hurting too. They were getting a whipping. So we look at these names, Gath, Afra, Saphir, Zaanan, etc. And you start to put together yet another picture. All right? Another picture. And we start to look at them. So here's what those names mean in their translation, all right? From Gath all the way down to Adullam, or Adullam. It says, the winepress will be in the house of dust, a delight, okay? A delight, going out into the fields to a place near the house of joining where there is bitterness, and Lachish, Israel, all right, will spring like a landslide of justice. And the holy place, the kingdom, the fortress itself, all right, is its inheritance is the winepress for the liar who runs away lying. But justice of the people will be the refuge. Didn't we just read that in chapter 5, essentially? That the winepress, remember, the winepress of God's wrath is that squeezing. It's that punishment. It's like a grape. They get squeezed, they get pressed. The house of dust, Afra, Saphir, will be a delight in going out to the fields in a place near the house of adjoining. Bitterness. But Israel, Lachish, all right, the land of Judah, the holy place, Zion, the kingdom, the fortress, which is Jerusalem. Its inheritance will be the winepress in Israel. Its inheritance is the winepress. We just read that in chapter 5. For all the liars that run away lying. All right, for the justice of the people is their refuge. An amazing picture. And, you know, it happens time and time and time again. We go back and we see these. And like I said, I was going to go back and take a look at these words and these names and see, you know, what's really going on here. And the way it's laid out, I mean, how did these names get placed there so perfectly? And when you look at them, they're never mentioned again, but they're mentioned, in fact, in the layout of the prophetic vision God gives to Micah. I will execute vengeance and anger and fury upon the heathen, such as they have not heard. And that's what we have. So now, Where does that bring us? Well, that brings us to chapter 6. And what happens in chapter 6? It's really, if I have to subtitle it, it's God pleads with them, okay? He pleads with them to appropriate. He says, hear you now what the Lord says. Arise and contend before the mountains, and let the hills hear thy voice. In other words, remember what I told you. There are times when God will speak to you, or you get a vision or a scripture. Appropriate it. Go out, speak it out. Let the hills hear thy voice. He's saying, testify. Speak of what I do and what I say, such that all spiritual creation in the world can hear it. And they will know when it happens that it was spoken, okay? And that it was testified by God's people. Hear ye, O mountains, the Lord's controversy, and you strong foundations of the earth, for the Lord has a controversy with his people, and he will plead with Israel. He will plead with Israel. Why do you think that's so? What does a father do, or a mother do, a parent do to a child who's lost his way? There's anger, there's frustration, there's confusion, there's pleading. He's saying, please, don't do this. I'm telling you what's going to happen. It could all be avoided. Don't do it. But in verse 3, O my people, what have I done to you? Wherein have I wearied you? Testify against me. What did I do to you to cause you to take this position against me? I don't ask much. And when you think about it, God really doesn't ask much. He gives so much more, all right, than we can imagine. But he asks for very little. Little. He asks us to recognize, understand, accept, and live within the means that he's given us. He asks us to, here is my son, upon whom, I have cast my spirit. I am greatly pleased in him. He gave us a model, all right? Then he expiated our guilt with him, such that we, when we sin, he doesn't see it anymore. We see it. Our conscience is seared. We ask for forgiveness, and it's granted. It's granted. And I'm not talking about repetitive patterns of sin. That's something that has to be broken. That's not good. But we all sin. It's inevitable as human beings. The difference is the sacrifice has been made for us. Our need is to accept it. The world, Israel, still thinks that they can gain, even the church, the big, Roman church and others, think that they can gain salvation by works and by imitating this and by pretending this and changing this to that, changing that to this. It doesn't work that way. That's man doing man's thing. God has given us the way. Why would we try to recreate or overdo what God does? That's just basically stepping way out of line, okay? And he's asked us not to do that. So he pleads with Israel. Oh, my people, what did I do? I brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. I redeemed thee out of the house of the servants, and I sent thee before Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. He brought us to where they needed to be. Oh, my people, remember now what Balak, the king of Moab, consulted, and what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him from Shittim unto Gilgal. Gilgal means going in circles. And you may know the righteousness of the Lord. Ask around. It's like anybody on the street. Hey, I got a rep. You don't know about me? Find out. Ask somebody about me. God's saying, check it out. Anyway, we're going to take a break here in just a few seconds, and then we're going to get back and talk about the culmination of this prophecy and the rest of Micah and how we need to go. Okay, so we'll be back in a minute, all right? Don't go away.